She fell to her knees trembling, her voice breaking as she cried out, "Please, punish me, not my son." She was ready to give up everything, her freedom, even her life, just to spare her child from harm. But in that cold, silent room, the human who stood before her didn't raise a hand or shout threats. Instead, he did something she never imagined. He stepped forward and offered warmth, safety, and a promise she had never heard before. In that moment, she realized, not all humans were cruel monsters. Some carried hearts big enough to save not just one life, but two. The cell smelled of mold and metal. The stench of desperation clung to the damp walls like a curse. She sat huddled in the corner, her long ragged cloak doing little to hide her trembling body. Each breath she took felt like inhaling shards of ice, and each heartbeat sounded like the tolling of a funeral bell. Her son, her tiny precious son, lay on the floor beside her, too weak even to whimper now. His skin had turned pale, his ribs sharp as blades beneath the thin gray cloth that barely covered him. She pressed a trembling hand against his cheek, feeling the fragile warmth that clung to him like the last ember in a dying fire. She would have given anything to protect him, her dignity, her future, her very life. The guards outside laughed as they shuffled past the bars, tossing scraps of moldy bread as if feeding animals in a zoo. Their words cut deeper than any blade, worthless, filthy creature, not even fit to crawl. But she didn't hear them anymore. Her world had shrunk to the sound of her son's breathing and the slow, steady beat of her own breaking heart. When she had first been captured, she'd thought maybe they'd let her son go, that maybe mercy still lived somewhere in those iron hearts. But day after day, she realized the truth. They didn't care whether he lived or died. He was nothing but bait to break her spirit, to make her beg and grovel. And now, after weeks of starvation and endless cold, her spirit had almost broken. Almost. Then one morning, she heard footsteps unlike any she'd known before, heavy but not cruel. Calm, deliberate, as if they belonged to someone who believed in order and purpose. The guards scurried away to make room, their faces pale with fear and forced respect. She dared to lift her head. A tall figure stood in the doorway, outlined in the weak morning light, a human male, dressed in sturdy dust-worn clothes, his eyes dark and steady. He didn't move like the guards. There was no arrogance in his stance, no mockery in his eyes. He looked around the cell, taking in the pitiful scene. The woman curled around her son, the filth, the raw, gnawed bones in the corner. She expected him to spit at her or turn away in disgust. Instead, he took a careful step forward. She scrambled to her knees, pulling her son behind her like a shield. Her voice cracked as she cried out, "Please, punish me, not him. I'll do anything. Just don't touch him, don't hurt him, please." Her words stumbled over each other, falling into the cold air like shattered glass. The human's expression didn't change. He looked at her, really looked, his eyes softening, as if he were seeing something beyond the ragged hair and blood-crusted clothes. She thought he might laugh or call her pathetic, but instead he knelt slowly, bringing himself to her level. "Breathe," he said softly. The sound of that single word nearly broke her. It wasn't a command or a threat. It was a lifeline thrown into a storm. She gasped, her breath shaking so violently that she thought she might collapse. Her son stirred faintly, whimpering. She pulled him closer, pressing her forehead to his. The human reached into a small pack at his side and took out a piece of flatbread. Real bread, fresh enough that she could smell the warmth even from where she knelt. She recoiled at first, her mind unable to comprehend kindness. He didn't shove it at her. Instead, he placed it carefully on a cloth and pushed it forward, leaving space for her to decide. Her son's eyes fluttered open, a weak sound escaping his throat, a sound so small and soft that it hurt more than any insult. She looked from her son to the bread, then to the human. Tears blurred her vision, hot and unstoppable. She reached for the bread with trembling fingers, then stopped. Her head shook violently. She pushed it back toward him. "Please, take me instead, punish me, don't pretend to be kind, it hurts too much." Her words dissolved into sobs. The human didn't take the bread back. Instead, he removed his gloves and held out his bare hands, palms open. His skin was rough, scarred, the hands of someone who worked and suffered, who knew pain. Slowly, carefully, he moved closer, until he could reach her shoulder. She flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, his hand rested there, gentle, solid. "You've suffered enough," he said in that same low voice. "Both of you. I won't hurt either of you." The words moved through her like warm water on frostbitten skin. She wanted to believe them, she wanted to collapse into that warmth and never rise again. But trust was a luxury she hadn't dared to dream of for so long. She pressed her lips together, her shoulders shaking. The human shifted, bringing out a flask of clean water and setting it beside the bread. He glanced at the guards outside the cell. They were watching, uncertain, shifting on their feet. When he looked back at her, His eyes were firm.
Eat, he said. Feed him first.
Her fingers finally obeyed. She tore a small piece of the bread and pushed it gently to her son's lips. He latched on, weak but desperate, chewing slowly. His eyes found hers, wide with confusion and fear. She nodded to him, her own lips trembling. Eat, little one, please, it's okay.
The human didn't interrupt.
He simply watched, as if guarding them from the world beyond those bars. As her son ate, color slowly returned to his cheeks. She offered him water, her hands still shaking so badly she spilled half of it. He drank as much as he could before falling into a shallow sleep against her chest. She turned to the human at last, her face streaked with tears and grime. Why help us? You don't even know us. We're not worth saving.
He studied her, then spoke quietly.
Because no one deserves to die like this. You're not worthless, you're a mother protecting her child. That alone makes you worth more than anyone else here. His words seemed to pull her soul from some dark pit. She clutched her son tighter, a sob bursting free. Her body folded forward until her forehead nearly touched the human's knees.
He didn't pull away.
Instead, his hand rested on her hair, gentle and patient, as if he understood that all her brokenness needed time. The guards finally dared to speak. Sir, we can take the boy away if you wish, the woman is disposable. The human's head snapped toward them, eyes hard as steel. Touch them, and I will make sure you never touch anything again. Silence crashed over the cell. The guards backed away, eyes wide, their smirks gone. He turned back to her, his voice softer again. We're leaving this place. You're coming with me. Both of you.
Her breath caught. Leave? With you?
Yes, he said firmly.
I have a ship.
There's food, warmth, safety. A real chance at life, for you and your son. She couldn't believe it, every instinct screamed that it was a trick, another cruel game. But the gentle touch on her hair, the bread, the water, these were real. Her son's soft breathing against her chest was real. She nodded slowly, afraid to speak. The human stood and offered his hand. She looked at it as if it were a star she'd wished for but never thought she'd see. Then, with all the trembling strength she had left, she took it. He pulled her up gently, supporting her as her legs almost gave out. She held her son close, pressing her lips to his hair. The human led them past the broken bars, past the stunned guards, out into the cold dawn air. She shivered in the new light, but the human's arm came around her, steady and warm. For the first time in countless nights, she looked up at the sky and dared to hope. The stars no longer looked like distant knives waiting to fall, they looked like lanterns lighting a path forward. And as they walked toward the waiting ship, she realized that maybe, just maybe, this human's heart was big enough to carry them both into a future she had never dared to imagine. In that moment, she tightened her hold on her son and whispered into his ear, "We're safe now, because of him." The human glanced down, catching her soft words. He gave her a small, tired smile, a smile that spoke of kindness earned through scars, of a soul that had chosen mercy again and again despite the world's cruelty. And she realized, she hadn't just found a savior. She'd found a new beginning. The wind cut against her skin as they stepped out of the fortress gates, but every step forward felt like breaking another invisible chain. The human's grip on her arm was firm yet kind. He guided her without pulling, as though he knew she might collapse if he let go even for a moment. Her son stirred weakly in her arms, blinking at the strange gray sky above. She pressed her lips to his forehead, feeling the fragile thrum of life there. The guards watched from a distance, their hands frozen on their weapons. None dared to follow, the human's words still rang like thunder in their ears. She kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting someone to rush out and drag them back. But each time she looked, the doorway remained empty, the darkness of that cell growing smaller and smaller behind them. The human led her to a low shuttle parked behind the fortress walls, a vessel that looked battered but strong, its hull streaked with old scars and repairs. He opened the hatch, guiding her inside. Warm air rushed out, washing over her frozen fingers and cheeks. Her son whimpered at the sudden change, curling closer to her. She stepped in, her eyes wide, taking in the interior, simple but clean, with blankets neatly folded, boxes of supplies stacked against the walls. It smelled faintly of metal and soap, no rot, no mold, no fear. The human closed the hatch behind them and knelt beside her. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, his touch as careful as if she were made of glass. "You can rest now," he said softly. "We'll be safe once we lift off. You don't have to be afraid anymore."
Her throat tightened.
She tried to speak but only a strangled gasp came out. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, her tears soaking into his shirt. For a long moment, he simply held her, his arm steady, his breath calm. When she finally pulled back, her son opened his eyes again. He looked at the human with a puzzled curiosity, his tiny fingers twitching. The human smiled and extended a finger toward him. Slowly, the child's hand curled around it. A sob burst from her chest, a sound so raw and deep that she nearly crumpled. The human looked at her then, his eyes soft. "What's his name?" he asked gently.
She swallowed hard.
"Talon," she whispered, her voice fragile as old paper.
Talon, the human repeated. He turned to the boy. "Hello, Talon."
"I'm Eric. It's nice to meet you." The boy didn't answer, he only stared, his small face slowly relaxing as if sensing something safe in the man's voice. Eric, she held the name in her mind like a flame against the cold, stood and moved to the controls. She watched as his hands moved with quiet expertise, flipping switches and pulling levers. The engines hummed to life beneath them, a gentle vibration that seemed to rattle the last pieces of her fear loose. She settled into a low cot, cradling Talon against her chest. As the ship lifted off the ground, she felt her heart lift too, as if carried by unseen wings. They rose above the fortress, above the broken stones and watchtowers, until the ground became a distant smear. She looked down one last time, the place that had been her prison, the place she'd thought would be her grave. Then she closed her eyes and held her son tighter. When she opened them again, Eric was standing beside her, offering a small bowl of warm broth. She took it hesitantly, her hands still trembling.
"Eat," he urged.
"You need your strength." She dipped her fingers into the bowl first, tasting it carefully. The warmth spread through her like sunlight after endless night. Talon stirred again, and she helped him sip a little. His small lips moved greedily, as if afraid it might vanish. Eric watched them, his arms crossed, but his expression was not one of judgment. Instead, there was a deep, weary sadness in his eyes, as though he'd seen too many souls like hers, too many broken hearts trying to stitch themselves back together. When they finished, she set the bowl aside and wiped Talon's mouth. She turned her gaze to Eric. Why us?" she asked softly. He sat down across from her, resting his elbows on his knees. "Because no one else would," he said after a moment. "I've seen too many people turn away, say it isn't their problem, pretend not to hear the crying. I couldn't be one of them." She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. Her hands trembled again, and he reached out, covering them with his own. His hands were warm, rough from work but full of gentleness. "We're going to a safe place," he continued. "There's a small colony on the outer rim. They accept refugees, families, children, anyone willing to work and build a new life."
Her breath caught. A new life? He nodded.
"A life where Talon can play outside without fear. Where you don't have to beg for scraps or pray for mercy from monsters.
You'll have a home. Food. A bed. A home."
The word sounded like a dream spoken in a forgotten language. She looked at Talon, who was already drifting into deeper sleep, his tiny hand resting against her chest. She traced the curve of his cheek, feeling the warmth that meant he was still here, still hers. Eric stood and began moving around the ship, checking supplies, adjusting the controls. She watched him, her eyes following every careful motion. He didn't move like a savior from stories. He moved like a tired farmer, a man who knew every inch of his tools and carried the weight of many small kindnesses on his shoulders. After a while, he returned with clean clothes and a small basin of warm water. "You can wash," he offered, setting them beside her. She hesitated, but he turned away, giving her privacy. Slowly, she peeled away the filthy rags that clung to her skin, wincing at the sores and bruises beneath. She dipped the cloth into the water, wiping her arms, her neck, her face. Each stroke felt like shedding layers of sorrow. When she finished, she put on the clean clothes, soft, simple but whole. She ran her fingers along the seams, marveling at the feeling of fabric not riddled with holes. Eric finally turned back. He looked at her for a moment, as if seeing her anew. She felt the heat rise to her cheeks but didn't look away. "You look stronger already," he said softly. She lowered her gaze. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. He stepped closer, his eyes kind. "You don't have to thank me. Just live. Just be free." A tear slipped down her cheek. He brushed it away with his thumb, the warmth of his touch sending shivers down her spine. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine tomorrow, not just surviving until morning but actually living. Teaching Talon to laugh again. Planting something green and watching it grow. Maybe someday, laughing herself. They traveled in silence for hours, the soft hum of the engines like a lullaby. Talon slept peacefully in her arms, his breathing even and calm. At last, Eric called her to the front. Through the wide viewport, She saw a distant blue-green planet, its surface covered in forests and rivers, small settlements nestled like pearls along its valleys. "That's it," Eric said quietly.
"Our new home."
She pressed her hand to the glass, her eyes wide with wonder. As they descended, she felt the weight of years slipping from her shoulders. With each kilometer closer to the surface, the world behind them faded, the screams, the dark cells, the hunger. All of it washed away by the promise of soil beneath her feet and sky above her head. When they landed, Eric opened the hatch and helped her down. The air smelled of wildflowers and damp earth. Talon stirred awake, blinking at the light, his eyes squinting against the brightness. She lowered him to the ground, his small feet sinking into the soft grass. He looked up at her, then at Eric, then at the endless field around them. He took a few shaky steps and laughed, a thin, reedy sound that nonetheless filled the clearing like birdsong. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Eric stepped beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her back. "This is your home now," he said, his voice low. "No one here will chain you. No one will starve you. You're free."
She turned to him, her lips parting.
For a moment, she could only stare at him, her heart too full to speak. Then, without thinking, she threw her arms around his neck. He caught her easily, holding her close. She wept into his shoulder, her whole body shaking. He didn't say anything, he simply held her, his breath warm against her hair. When she finally pulled back, she cupped his face in her hands.
"Thank you," she whispered.
"For saving us. For believing we deserved to be saved." His eyes glistened in the sunlight. "Everyone deserves it," he said softly. "Especially you." Talon came running back to them then, clutching a fistful of wildflowers, his face bright with joy. She knelt to accept them, her tears falling onto the petals. She looked up at Eric and realized that the future wasn't something she had to fear anymore. It was something she could build, with her son at her side and this human who had chosen kindness over cruelty. In that moment, under the wide endless sky, she felt something bloom inside her chest, something she had thought long dead. Hope. She rose, taking Eric's hand in hers, and together they walked into the fields, Talon skipping ahead of them. With each step, the ghosts of the past fell away, and the path ahead shone brighter and brighter. The nightmare was over. And those scars would remain, they would be reminders of what she had overcome, of the love she had found and the life she had reclaimed. And so, with the sun rising over the green hills and Talon's laughter echoing like a promise, they began their new life, not as prisoners or victims, but as a family strong and unbreakable, held together by the quiet, steadfast heart of a human who refused to turn away.